Today we're going to be talking all about the different types of thoughts that we can have, and more specifically, we're going to be talking about those not so helpful thoughts. These are the thoughts that tend to lead us to feeling anxious, overwhelmed, angry, and just generally not feeling all that great about ourselves. Hey, I'm Katie McLaughlin. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the Cincinnati area, and I'm super passionate about bringing mental health education out into the world so that it can positively impact your life. If you're new around here, I would love for you to say hello. Go ahead and drop a note down in the comments below. And if you haven't already done so, please do go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It really will be so beneficial to get this mental health education out to other folks just like yourself. Let's dive into today's video. These not so helpful thought patterns that we're going to be covering today are commonly known in the mental health world as cognitive distortions. This is a cognitive behavioral therapy term, and while I as a counselor do utilize cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, I'm not the biggest fan of this particular term. The reason that it's not my favorite term is that it kind of leads us to believe that there are good thoughts and there are bad thoughts. And that's just one small stepping stone away from believing there are good emotions and bad emotions. This type of categorizing just unfortunately leads us to unfairly or harshly judging ourselves. So personally, I prefer to use the term thought patterns just to take a little bit more of a neutral approach. And really, this more general or neutral term that I'm using of thought patterns can lead us away from that unfair or harsh judgment of ourselves, those types of thoughts that just lead us to feeling more anxious, more depressed, more shame, etc. Okay, enough of my counselor soapbox. There are usually 10 or so different thought patterns that you can find out in the interwebs, so I'm just gonna run through each of them today. I'll give some examples just so you can kind of get a feel for what they're called and how they might show up for you. The first one is called all or nothing thinking. This is also known as black or white thinking. It's really looking at these end of the spectrum types of thoughts. An easy example or an easy way to think about this one is if you tend to think of yourself as, there's perfection or there's complete failure. It's one or the other. For instance, if you did not get 100% or even the extra credit on a test, then you view it as a complete failure. You're kind of using these end of the spectrum types of thoughts, these all or nothing types of thoughts, to describe your experiences rather than seeing any of the middle gray area, such as, maybe I made a mistake, or I didn't do the best that I could, or I didn't do as well as I thought I was going to, but that's okay. The second one is called overgeneralization. One way to pinpoint if you are using this particular thought pattern is by looking at your word choices. So if you're often using the terms always or never, you might be using this one. An example of this in just daily life could look like maybe if your loved one gives you criticism or even constructive criticism, and one of your thoughts is, I'm never good enough in their eyes. Number 3 is called the mental filter. This can also be described as tunnel vision or even a negativity bias. This is when just one thing goes wrong. It could be the smallest detail ever, and it could have gone wrong, and that's all you can think about all throughout that day, maybe even that week, or it's just something that's really hard to let go of, and it can really impact the way that we go about the rest of our day. An example of this one could look like, you're going about your regular Monday. This would be a total Monday thing, and let's say you spill your smoothie on accident and it completely gets in your backpack and just all over everything. You clean it up and everything's cool, but you just can't shake that you made that mistake, and it's really hard to let go of. Maybe you're in a down mood for the rest of the day, and you're just not feeling the greatest for the rest of the week. Number 4 is called discounting the positive, and it is just like it sounds. You're able to see that there are some good things happening, unlike in the mental filter where you're super focused on that not so great detail that happened. But in this one, you can see that there are some good things going on. It's really easy to discount them. You don't really give them much weight. So an example of this one could look like maybe you wrote this essay and it actually won an award, but instead of being proud and just grateful for the work that you were able to do and for this opportunity and really all the hard work that you put into it and the time, instead of seeing those good things, maybe you think something like, yeah, I won this award, but the judges were really easy this time. Or maybe something like, I guess I didn't deserve to win, or this award doesn't really mean much to me. Number 5 is called jumping to conclusions. Now, this one has a couple of different branches off of it, but the general idea is we're kind of making up narratives with no actual evidence. One of these branches is called mind reading. Now, this is where we kind of make assumptions of how others are going to perceive us or how they currently perceive us. So an example of this one could be something like, I can't ask Sally to hang out after class because she would never say yes, even though there's really no evidence that she wouldn't want to hang out with you after class. The other branch of jumping to conclusions is called fortune telling. This could be something like predicting that I'm gonna fail a test or I'm never gonna win that award. Fortune telling is usually on the not so helpful side because we are predicting that bad things are gonna be happening. So we could be predicting that, I'm gonna fail that test, or I'm never gonna feel happy again. My depression is gonna just stick with me through everything. Number 6 is magnification or minimization. When we magnify something, we are blowing it way out of proportion. This is also known as catastrophizing. It's where we think of the absolute worst case scenario and we believe that is the only possibility. Minimization is when we decrease something's importance. So let's say you graduate from high school or college and you think something like, well, I was supposed to do that. You kind of write off its significance. Number 7 is called emotional reasoning. This is when we believe something is true because we feel a certain way. An example of this one is, if we feel embarrassed in a social situation, then because we are feeling embarrassed, we just assume that we did something embarrassing. But just because we feel embarrassed doesn't mean that there's any evidence that we did anything embarrassing or that others noticed anything that we were doing at all. So we're thinking that something is true about ourselves, but there's really no evidence for it. Number 8 are the should statements. Now these are unfair and likely unrealistic expectations that we place on ourselves and others. And they come in the form of shoulds, oughts, musts, things like they should have known better, or I should have known better, or they should have done something totally different because that's the way that I would have done it. These types of statements, like I said, come with those expectations, even if we don't realize that we are actually placing those expectations on ourselves and others, but that's kind of what we are doing. And when we do that, we're likely setting ourselves up to feel pretty disappointed because it's an expectation that was never actually spoken. Number 9 is called labeling. Labeling is when we place a label onto ourselves or others. One example of this is if I were to call myself a loser if I simply made a mistake. Another example of this would be calling someone a jerk because they did not hold the door open for you. Labeling is rooted in the belief that we are what we do. And so if I do something not so great, then that must mean I am not so great. When in reality, what I do, the actions that I take, and who I am, the character of myself, are two totally different things. Number 10 is called personalization. This is when we blame ourselves for something that's not actually inside of our control. An example of this one is when we feel like it's our fault when someone else is upset with us, when in reality, we cannot control how others respond to us. Okay, so those are the 10 not so helpful thought patterns that we tend to use all the time without ever really knowing it. Which of course is unfortunate because these types of thought patterns can often lead to us feeling not so great about ourselves or not so great about others or the world in general. Next week we're going to be talking about how we can be more aware of when we use these types of thought patterns and maybe even how to change them if we want to, so that we can feel better about ourselves and also just feel more in control of our thoughts and our emotions and how we go about the world. So I'll see you next time.